Hey guys, welcome back to another Book Lovers Pizza video. Today I'm going to be reviewing The Undercover Economist by Tim Harford. Today, in light of this economics book, I'm wearing a fancier outfit than usual, and we have a special guest, John Maynard Keynes, joining us today. Born in 1973, Tim Harford is a well-established economist, broadcaster, journalist and author. He was educated in Oxford University with a bachelor's degree in PPE, so politics, philosophy and economics, and he later on went to economics and management at the same university. He's a senior economist at the Financial Times, publishing weekly articles under the Undercover Economist blog title, which will be linked down under this video description. He has won many awards, such as the Winscott Prize. He's the shared winner of the Bastiat Prize with Jamie White, who I've actually met before, the Rybczynski Prize, and the OBE in the 2019 New Year Honours, and was a winner of the Royal Statistical Society Award for Journalistic Excellence. As a broadcaster, Tim Harford has presented many shows, such as Trust Me, I'm an Economist, More or Less, 50 Things That Made the Modern Economy, and How to Vaccinate the World. In addition to this, he's written 10 books, one of which including The Undercover Economist, which I'll be reviewing today. I'd recommend this book for people above the age of 15 who are somewhat considering what they want to do in the future as career-wise. I say this because as a book, The Undercover Economist teaches you a lot about economics, but having real-world case studies that are very interesting to consider, and with economics as an added bonus, giving you deeper insight to what happens, the systems behind it, and the incentives that make what happen. It's a very interesting book that teaches you about economic theory without going too much into the heavy jargon and without the added pressure of endeavours such as reading a textbook. The Undercover Economist is arguably one of Harford's most successful books, selling over 1 million copies worldwide. I actually got this book for Christmas, but I couldn't wait to read it and share it with you guys, so here we are. One of the things that strikes me the most about this book is Harford's strong chains of analysis and reasoning. He's able to take everyday events and delve so much deeper into each of them through such a critical lens, and is able to see so many things that remain hidden, or undercover you could say, to most people. The book is split into 10 chapters. Chapter 1, Who Pays for Your Coffee? 2, What Supermarkets Don't Want You to Know? 3, Perfect Markets and the World of Truth? 4, Crosstown Traffic? 5, The Inside Story. 6, Rotten Investments and Rotten Eggs. 7, The Men Who Knew the Value of Nothing. 8, Why Poor Countries Remain Poor. 9, Beer, Fries and Globalization. And 10, How China Grew Rich. Through each chapter, Harford is able to dive in and unravel and clarify so many of the world's events into bite-sized and understandable case studies. He uses these case studies and then implements theory to back it up. My favourite learnings from the book include things such as David Ricardo's theory of marginal land, learning about price discrimination from Pillcorp, learning about the auctioning of the spectrum from the UK government, to understanding the GFC of 2007 to 2009 through egg cartons, understanding how China got so rich, and other things. For similar reasons, my favourite chapters in the book include Chapter 7, which details the auctioning of the spectrum in the UK as a result of the dot-com bubble, which teaches the reader the power of the right economic incentives in the right situation. Similarly, Chapter 3, The World of Truth, teaches us about the power of the free market and how effective policies that are perhaps less obvious can be implemented to maintain equality. More so, I learnt about the omnipotence of economics as a subject and as a way of viewing the world. Economics as a subject isn't just about stocks, shares, bonds, or even GDP or balance sheets. It's about how people think and how they interact with things of value. This book taught me that with the right incentives, we can make the world a better and perhaps more efficient place with more desirable outcomes for everyone. As for my recommendation, I would recommend this book to anyone who's even slightly interested in economics, or even if you're not, as this book is such a cohesive analysis of the world around us and how people see things differently, especially how economists see their things differently. As you can see with the different tabs, it's quite a lot of interesting things that I've found. The blue indicates key terms, the yellow indicates key concepts, and the purple tabs are case studies that I found especially interesting. So now we're moving on to the chapter by chapter section of the video, where I summarize and review every chapter in this book. This segment of the video definitely includes spoilers, so if you want to read the book without having any predisposition or any knowledge before, then please feel free to skip ahead. Chapter 1, Who Pays for Your Coffee? You may have heard the phrase location, 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 which is basically referring to the idea that power comes from scarcity. This is most certainly true in the coffee market, where coffee retailers pay premiums to get what David Ricardo calls the meadowland, in which economists have used to make applicable to certain different contexts. For example, in the coffee market, for the coffee meadowland, where companies are willing to pay significant premiums rather than settling for buying the grasslands or the marginal land. In other words, consumers willing to pay higher prices is why rent is high, not the other way around. Another interesting concept is why rent in London is so high. This stems from the restriction in the land caused by the Green Belt in the 1930s, where the restriction in land means that there's less supply and more monopoly power means that rent will be higher. Things such as better infrastructure or improved transportation may shift the balance. Chapter 2. What supermarkets don't want you to know. First and foremost, it's important to distinguish the difference between first-degree price discrimination and third-degree price discrimination, which we talk about here. First degree is where the firm charges the consumer individually on an individual and unique basis according to the maximum amount in which they are willing and able to pay and afford. Third degree price discrimination is when the company charges groups of different demographics of customers different prices to maximize their own revenue and profit made. Companies such as Starbucks have a self-incrimination strategy whereby they produce a lot of similar products and sell them at different prices, some at premiums, to distinguish which consumers are less price sensitive, and they basically reveal themselves to who is willing to pay more through their wallet. There's a similar pricing strategy in supermarkets where if you compare supermarkets such as Aldi and Woolworths, they have similar prices for their basic products. So if you go to get the exact same basket of goods from each supermarket, they'll be pretty much the same price. However, the different demographics in which the companies target have different ideas of what the quote-unquote basic is. Some customers at one supermarket may have a more luxurious idea of what that is, and others might have a more modest idea of what that is. Another example of this is seats on a train. French economist Émilie Dupuit gave the example of trains. It doesn't cost that much for the producers of the companies to improve, say, the quality of the seats, or having a table between the seats, or having a roof over their head, because this was quite a long time ago. The reason the difference between the first class and third class is so big isn't because they want to punish third class for not paying that much money. It's because they want to maximize this difference so that first class and second class don't want to go to third class, and they want to stay in their one for fear of having much worse conditions. There are also similar phenomenons in things such as laser printers, cameras, and processing chips. There are two leaks in this price targeting strategy. The first, that the rich people will buy the cheap products anyways unless they're sabotaged, for example the train situation, and the second, that products may leak from one group to another, as seen in the historic example of the medicine that's been sent to Africa at a cheaper price, except being resold illegally for higher prices back in countries such as the US. Chapter 3. Perfect Markets and the World of Truth. In essence, the world of truth is a hypothetical situation that's based on the foundation that, first, prices are optional, so people don't have to spend money on what they don't want to spend it on, and the second, along that idea, every economic transaction is voluntary. Along this route, it can be said that most things in the free market improve efficiency, such as what economists call the double thank you. For example, back to the coffee market scenario, coffee makers would prefer money to the coffee that they have, and the consumers would prefer coffee to the money that they have. This is why there's a market, because in this market there's win-win situations. The benefits of the world of truth are said by Tim Harford himself. Companies are making the right things, they're making them the right ways, they're making them in the right proportions, and they're making it and selling them to the right people. In other words, the people who value the product the most. In the free market, prices are the true representation of costs to firms as well as value to consumers. In the non-price system, the rationing, incentive, and signaling function of price have all disappeared. How can you grasp the value of free education or public defense or things such as free healthcare if there's no price to go with it, if there's no price to measure how much they cost to the firms as well as how much people value them? Inspired by Nobel Prize winner Kenneth Arrow, Harvard suggests theories such as the Head Start theorem and the lump sum tax would maintain equality through this process. Chapter 4. Cross-town traffic. In cross-town traffic, Harvard teaches us the importance of recognizing the externalities in our everyday life. Externalities are basically the consequences of economic transactions that have befallen on third parties who are unrelated to the previously mentioned transaction. Negative externalities are things such as pollution resulting from factory production, which can negatively damage the environment, as opposed to things such as positive externalities, which may be the pleasure you gain from looking at the Christmas lights of your next door neighbour, or their massive Santa Claus inflatable. Through considering the different effects of marginal and average prices, Harfords suggests policies such as the externality tax in situations such as congestion or pollution. Chapter 5. The Inside Story. When considering the second-hand car market, you have things called peaches, which are the functioning cars, and lemons, which are the non-functioning cars. Economist George Akerlof concluded in his 1970 paper that theoretically, according to economic theory, second-hand car markets should not exist, and we'll see why. Say for example, in the car market, if a car is worth $5,000 to the buyer and $4,000 to the seller, a buyer would face a 50-50 gamble of whether this car is a lemon or if it's a peach. And because of this probability, he or she is probably willing to pay around $2,000 to $2,500. The seller, however, doesn't face this problem. They know the car they're selling and they know if it's going to be a lemon or a peach. They don't face this conundrum. So a seller of a peach wouldn't be willing to sell a car under $4,000, but a seller of a lemon would be able to. But then again, if the seller of the lemon sells under $4,000, the buyer will know that it's a lemon. So according to this, the sellers aren't willing to sell at such a low price, and the buyers, because of this risk, aren't willing to buy at such a high price. In this example, there's no market. The problem explained above is a problem of asymmetric information, where one party has more information than the other party, allowing them to make a more informed choice, but also putting the other person or other party at a disadvantage. As a solution to this, economist Michael Spence proposed the idea that sellers of peaches should display a sign of faith, a sign of goodwill, and display a real signal of quality that a seller of lemons wouldn't be able to do. And now we have expensive car showrooms. Joseph Stiglitz, on the other hand, analysed the prospect of having insurance markets as a way of covering this risk. In the insurance market, however, there comes this problem of moral hazard. The moral hazard is a problem where the buyer of insurance knows more than the seller of insurance, hence asymmetric information, and someone with the insurance is more likely to do more careless and risky things than someone who doesn't have the insurance. So in this way, the person who buys the insurance is more likely to actually claim the insurance. And to combat this, to kind of balance it out, the insurance company has implemented various different types of plans to target different consumers, whether that's on a health, so if you're smoking or if you're not smoking, or if you drink alcohol or if you don't, or a monetary basis, as in your income. Chapter 6. Rotten Investments and Rotten Eggs. Through this chapter, Harfords covers the GFC, so the global financial crisis, of 2007 to 2009 through none other than an analogy of egg cartons and eggs. Here's the premise of it. Imagine you have a carton of eggs in front of you. This carton of eggs represents mortgage-backed securities. And in the egg carton, there are good eggs and there are rotten eggs. The rotten eggs that fill them represent subprime loans. Banks then bought these subprime loans, or as we want to say in the analogy, the potential rotten eggs, from the originators, from the companies that issued these loans, and repackage them into CDOs, so collateral debt obligations. And then they repackage those into CDOs squared, and then those into CDOs cubed, and then those, and then so on and so on and so forth. Essentially, these subprime mortgages depended entirely on the fact that the housing market was going to continue rising. As explained by Selena Gomez and Richard Taylor in The Big Short, the chain reaction of these synthetic CDOs ultimately faltered and led to more people defaulting on their loans, and then that created an avalanche. The unlikeliness of this crisis is perhaps most accurately portrayed in David Viniar's quote, who was the CFO of Goldman Sachs during the time, in which he said, "We were seeing things that were 25 standard deviation moves several days in a row. As calculated by financial economist Kevin Dowd, we would expect 3 25 standard deviation days once every this many years." Anyways, the banks were smart and devised a type of insurance called credit default swaps, where they covered each other's liabilities. This meant that either the banks all go bad, they all fail, or none of them fail. And so this is what led to the government ultimately having to bail them out, which they did. In the UK, the government spent £150 billion each year. Total damages were estimated by economist Andy Haldane to be between £1,700 billion and £8,000 billion respectively. It's teetered the world economy into a position where their predicted GDP growth is substantially lower, and nothing seems to be changing that. Chapter 7. The Men Who Knew the Value of Nothing. The eponym of this chapter originates from a quote by Oscar Wilde saying, "Someone who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing," his definition of a cynic, which is often applied to economists. The chapter heavily touches on game theory, and because of that it talks about John von Neumann and Nobel Prize winner John Nash. In this chapter he uses case studies such as the Vickery auction of New Zealand, which was a sealed bid second price auction, meaning that the bids were sealed and then the winner, so the person who gave the highest auction, paid the price of the second highest auction. Comparatively, it also talks about the UK government's use of simple auctions during the 3G Spectrum auction, which was an unprecedented success. Through careful and meticulous planning, the game theorists of the UK government's auction achieved the government's hopes of raising £3 billion in just 50 rounds, so 50 rounds each round going for 30 minutes. Comparatively, at the end of the auction they raised £29 billion instead. This is the equivalent of selling your house with the intended purpose of selling it for $300,000, say, and then instead selling it for $2.25 million. The success of the auction was that it almost reflected the World of Truth mentioned earlier in Chapter 3. The prices bid by the companies were their true beliefs of what the thing was worth, and each company didn't want to be the first one to drop out because of pride and their reputation, and companies were able to learn from each other based on how much they bid and how much each of the companies thought that the spectrum was worth. Chapter 8, Why Poor Countries Are Poor. Through Chapter 8, Harford talks about two different types of theories, one of diminishing returns and one of increasing returns. The first idea of diminishing returns is the idea that developed countries, the countries that are rich, that have infrastructure in place, each additional investment in infrastructure gives less returns than the previous one. If you apply this to contexts such as Cameroon, for example, if you give them an infrastructure project, it will likely have a lot greater marginal returns than if you were to invest it in a developed country such as the USA. The alternative theory of increasing returns suggests that the more you have, the faster you'll grow, because the things that you're getting in better complement with the things that you already have. For example, phones are only useful if other people have phones, roads are only useful if other people have cars. The chapter further on goes into exploring concepts such as Paul Rosenstein-Rodin's theory of the big push theory of investment, economics suggesting that a dictator is better than a leader who moves around looking for different victims, government corruption and kleptocracy, crime, and the failure of public institutions. Some solutions proposed by Harvard include cutting red tape and allowing small businesses to actually legally set up their business, legal reforms to reduce the corruption of the kleptocratic government, promoting democracy and opening up trade, meaning to reduce your tariffs, because in countries such as Cameroon, tariffs are up to 12.7% compared to the global average of 2.8%, and enlisting the world economy for help through multilateral organizations such as the World Bank or the IMF. Chapter 9, Beer, Fries and Globalization. Globalization is the interconnectedness of goods and services throughout the world. This can be things such as the migration of people across different countries, FDI, so foreign direct investment into different countries, the trading of goods and services, amongst other things. In this chapter we're introduced to two different economic theories briefly, the first about David Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage and also the Lerner theorem. David Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage suggests that different countries specialize in different things due to their actual geography and the way that their economy is shaped, and Lerner's theorem suggests that a tax on imports is a tax on exports. One of my favorite theories in the entire book is David Friedman's theory that trade is just another form of technology. I actually encountered this theory in my John Locke briefing in Oxford, which was especially interesting. It essentially suggested that there are two ways of manufacturing cars in the United States, either producing them or farming them in Iowa. The wheat farmed in Iowa would then be shipped through the Pacific Ocean to Japan, where it would come back on the same ships as the same equivalent of cars. So if the wheat would say worth $2 million, there'd be $2 million worth of cars coming back. Harford also touches on two common complaints about globalization. The first, that it's bad for the environment, and the second, that it's unequal and exacerbates inequality. To address the first issue, Harford suggests policies such as an externality tax that has already been used in the US in regard to their sulfur emissions, which can then be used again for carbon dioxide emissions to combat climate change. In response to exacerbating inequality, just look at the shoes you have on right now. They're probably either Nike, Adidas, or Asics. However, to get you these shoes, production has often been outsourced to countries such as Vietnam, China, the Philippines, etc., as done by the three big companies as mentioned before. In other words, sweatshops are the symptoms, not the cause of global inequality. Although it's not nice to hear, the people who work at the sweatshops do so voluntarily, mainly because their alternatives are so bad that they'd rather work at a sweatshop instead. Back to trade and globalization. The 1994 Uruguay trading rounds resulted in an extra $100 billion added to the world economy. It's predicted that the removal of all trade barriers right now could increase global wealth and income by 6%. Free trade can have many benefits, such as reducing the monopoly power of large corporations by introducing them to international competition, which then promotes efficiency, promotes innovation, better technology, and overall improvements for the actual company's efficiency as well as the consumers who are getting them. Here's a brief summary of China's economic history, starting from 1949 when China became a republic. For the most part of the 20th century, China was actually poorer than Cameroon, which is 50 times poorer than most Americans. In China in the 1950s, millions of people died from a famine. In 1960, the Cultural Revolution meant that the Chinese government relocated millions of people who lived in central regions, who are educated and skilled workers, to the countryside to work on farms. During Mao's reign, people were rewarded with work points which were distributed along their collectives, usually of 20 to 30 families. This meant that any profits, any benefits that they got were minuscule, and there was really no incentive to work harder. After Deng took power, he immediately went down a path of reform and started using the price system. In addition, retail prices were allowed to rise, trade between regions were eased, and production quotas were abandoned. This resulted in 10% increases in exports from the early 1980s. In 1950s, every 100 yuan invested in the economy resulted in extra 40 yen being produced. In 1970, that number was 18 yuan per 100 yuan invested, and in 1990, it was back to 72 yen per 100 yen invested under Deng's leadership. In 1990s, China's presence on the global trade was minuscule. In 2009, it was the largest exporter in the world. The success was the result of three things. The first, China was able to use labor-intensive methods due to its large population. The second, it was able to use the currency that it got from the exports, which it earned as revenue, to invest into new technologies and learn more about the industry. And three, through foreign direct investment, they were able to use joint ventures to actually learn more about the trade while encouraging companies to come into their country to produce. Now for a summary of the lessons learnt in the book by Tim Harford himself, I'd like to call these the 6 commandments. First, to fight scarcity, power, and corruption. Second, correct externalities. Third, try to maximize information. 4, get the incentives right. 5, engage with other countries, and most of all, embrace markets. Once again, thank you so much for watching today's video about The Undercover Economist by Tim Harford. I really enjoyed the book, and I'm sure if you get it, you will too. See you.